Great. Well, thanks, Russell, for coming onto the channel. I really appreciate it. How are you doing today?
To be honest, I've been up all night, so I'm very tired. But I'm going to power through. But if I'm a little slow here and there, my brain not functioning, you'll have to forgive me. But I'll uh, I'll do my best.
Well, I really appreciate it, Russell, especially after a night
No
of
worries.
very little sleep to kind of come on and talk, cast your mind back, 20 years ago to Silent Alarm, obviously Bloc Party's amazing debut record. Um, Before we get into the making of that record, though, I just wanted to go back to the band's early beginnings. I was doing a bit of research before talking to you, and I know that Kelly, in past interviews, has talked a lot about how the idea of the band came about when the two of you met at Reading Festival and talked about putting a band together. I just wonder, what do you remember about meeting Kelly for the first time all those years ago? And what stood out about him to you as a potential music collaborator?
Yeah, it's funny because I can't remember exactly when we first met. I know we often cite the Reading Festival as the first time, and it certainly could have been. I can remember kind of a few very early episodes where we first met, and I can't quite remember the chronology of them because I know we went to the Reading Festival. I think it was 1998, and we kind of had mutual friends. A mutual friend organised a bus for everyone to go to the festival, and there was about 50 of us. So some people knew each other, and some people didn't, but everyone was kind of linked. And yeah, all 50 of us went to the festival together and kind of camped together. So we met some new people that weekend, and yeah, that certainly could have been the first time we met. But the first time I remember kind of properly engaging with Kelly was someone was having a house party near us. I don't know if this still happens, but when we were teenagers, anytime someone's parents went away, there would be a house party, and they could be quite chaotic. But yeah, at this particular one, I remember going upstairs with Kelly because whoever's house it was had a guitar, and I kind of told him that I played guitar, and he seemed really interested. I think probably because I mentioned some of the music I was inspired by, and it resonated with him, perhaps compared to what some of our other friends were listening to. So we went upstairs, and I kind of started just like messing around on the guitar, like showing him things I was doing, and I think because my style of playing, even at that point, was very different to our friends. Most of our friends who played instruments had kind of had guitar lessons and would learn like kind of like quite a traditional route of playing, and were playing like the blues and chords and bands like Oasis, whereas I was predominantly self-taught, and I was just learning the bands that I was listening to by ear, kind of like Smashing Pumpkins and Radiohead and the Smiths. And yeah, I was just I was playing kind of randomly, like making up my own chords and things like that. And yeah, I think he was quite excited by the prospect of someone who was kind of musically aligned with what he was seeing. Um, so yeah, that and the Reading Festival are kind of my first memories of meeting Kelly. And then shortly after the house party, Kelly got my phone number off of someone. Back then, we didn't have mobile phones. It was just kind of landlines. And so my phone rang at home, and I answered it, and I didn't know who it was. I'd only met Kelly once or twice at that point, and he didn't say who it was. He was just like, "Hello, Russell," and just started talking, and said that he wanted to start a band. And I wanted to be in a band as well. I was already kind of doing things with other friends, but just kind of for fun. But he sounded um, particularly like kind of passionate and motivated about actually like doing something seriously. So I agreed to it, but I didn't know who I was speaking to, and we kind of ended the phone call, and I had agreed to join this band with someone, but I didn't know who it was, and I kind of had to gradually figure out and talk to some other people and figure out, oh, okay, it was Kele, and yeah, then it went from there. But yeah, generally they are my very first memories of meeting him and the the genesis of Bloc Party essentially.
Got you. That's really interesting. Also pretty funny to kind of go to a practice and not know who you're going to kind of end up playing music with. But obviously, it's ended up very fortunately. So was it? You go back to those early influences. It was the likes of Radiohead and the Smashing Pumpkins. Were there any kind of more unconventional influences? I'm thinking not your typical guitar bands that kind of struck a chord for you both that you remember.
Yes. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I mean, we both, and our friendship group in general, we listened to a lot of less commercial music at the time, predominantly guitar music, but we would, almost every weekend or sometimes more often, we would, go into London because we lived on the outskirts of London at the time. So we were fortunate enough that we could get the train to London and see live music very regularly. And at that point in time, you could go to like especially places like Camden, and there were pubs, and there were multiple gigs every night, dozens of gigs every night. You could look in um, like the Enemy or the Melody Maker music publications, and there'd be listings of dozens of gigs every night just in London alone. So we were quite sport for choice. And you could go and see like a small new young band in just in front of 10, 20, 30, 40 people, and we would do that all the time and discover new bands. So I'm trying to think of examples. There was a Scottish band called Urusei Yatsura at the time. Who else was a band called Scarfo, Billy Mahoney. Very much kind of bands of their time. They had kind of elements of math rock, I guess, to them. They didn't seem particularly commercial, but they were bands very much guitar based and lots of um, dual guitar interplay, which we found exciting at the time. That I think a lot of bands, certainly the more mainstream, tended to have either just one guitarist, or if they had two guitarists, they were very much in the traditional role of, this guitarist plays some chords and this guitarist plays the lead. Whereas these smaller bands, like the ones that I mentioned, were, they didn't seem to function like that. They like both guitarists were kind of mixing between, and they were doing interplay between the guitars rather than one guitar fits here, one guitar fits here. So yeah, we found that inspiring because neither of us felt like we wanted to slot into the role of one of us does this and one of us does that. From the offset, we wanted the guitars to work together, and for there not to be any rules in what we did, kind of to experiment and just see what we could create.
That's really interesting. I really want to get into that, your approach to playing guitar on Silent Alarm in a moment,
Hmm.
Russell, because I think your guitar playing and the interplay, like you say, between you and Kele is so integral to the sound of that record. But before we do that, I was reading again some interviews from the time of when the album came out. But one of the things that you and Kele seemed to say at the time was that alongside kind of traditional guitar bands and unconventional bands you were listening to, another big influence was kind of going out in London and going to nightclubs and experiencing club culture for the first time. And I know that you did a bit of DJing around that time as well. Are there any influences from the world of dance music in particular that you remember bonding over between you and Kele, or going out, or experiences at clubs? And do you have a view of how that kind of impacted the sound of your jamming between the two of you early on? I think a lot of people tend to think about just kind of guitar bands as being influential, but I'm really interested as to the electronic influence as well, and where that came from.
Yeah, so when we met, yeah, it was around the summer of 1998, and initially we were just kind of meeting up at my parents' house and jamming on guitars between the two of us, listening to, yeah, predominantly guitar music. Then, you know, around probably 2000, our lives changed quite a lot. We both finished school, and I kind of got into club culture quite a lot. I think I was feeling quite disillusioned with new guitar music as kind of that decade ended. There were a lot of the artists that were being pushed were um, not very interesting to me. It was quite like a dry period for guitar music, and I kind of the group of friends that I was associating with then started going to clubs. You know, we were old enough to go, and like kind of listening to like house music, trance music, and I kind of a friend enticed me to go and join them. You know, he was saying how much fun he was having, and I did, and I had an amazing time, and I got very much kind of absorbed into that world. You know, I still enjoyed playing guitar, and like the artists that I was still kind of following at that time, but the world of the electronic music felt so much more exciting, like the kind of energy of it at that point. And yeah, I think probably for maybe like a year, I was like kind of completely in that world. Like I to the point of I bought kind of decks to DJ, and was DJing at house parties and things with friends. Um, I was quite kind of consumed by that, and I was almost kind of abandoning guitar music because it didn't feel very interesting to me. You know, we were still trying to work on the band, and I wanted to do that, but any other music from there, I wasn't really enjoying. I was enjoying the atmosphere of the clubbing scene. And then I think um, what year was it? Probably, yeah, late 2000. I think it was. I went to university in London, and so did Kelly, and we started going to clubs again, but we discovered no, I guess prior to that we were only going to gigs. We weren't going to clubs because there wasn't the age limit for gigs, so you could only go to clubs when you were 18. Um, and yeah, then we went to university and started going to clubs, but we found that there were kind of indie clubs as well, playing more guitar music, and as much as I enjoyed going to the dance clubs, I still felt like my tribe at that point was kind of the indie scene, and so I started going to those clubs as well. And then we started noticing that there was they were kind of coming together in a few places. Like generally, the tribes were quite strict to their musical genres. Like if you went to um, like a house club, you're going to hear house music or variations of that. And if you went to an indie club, you're going to hear Oasis, Blur, White Stripes, whatever, things like that. But then there was one club in particular called Trash, that was near Tottenham Court Road, and it was hosted in a club that predominantly played electronic music. So they had like that kind of set up with a proper big sound system and the kind of arches and the lighting and things. So yeah, it had that club vibe. But the DJ was playing kind of all kind of genres. There were no rules. Like he was playing guitar music, and then he was playing dance music, and then kind of like mashups and things like that. And that felt like really really exciting to us. It was like, you know we like both these things, but they've always felt quite separate, and now they feel like they're coming together. And that, we started absorbing that, and I think other people were at the time as well, other artists. And so um, to the point that at this club, they would have artists perform sometimes as well, not every week, but kind of every few weeks. And there were groups like LCD Sound System, the Rapture, the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, that like kind of functionally were guitar bands, but heavily influenced by electronic music, and they were playing music that you could go to a club and dance to, which wasn't always the way with other guitar bands. And yeah, and that just felt like, like this is our world, like this is like what we're doing. We're like, we want to, we're we're musicians that play guitars, but we want to play music that works in this club setting that people can come and dance to. Yeah, so kind of roundabout long story. Like I guess that's how the combination of influences came. There was a period of listening exclusively, at least for me, to dance music, and then it led into this period where all the genres were coming together. Um, yeah, and it felt like those rules of you have to be something, you have to fit into this box, were becoming less applicable, and that spoke to us.
Sure. I read an interview again with Kelly, and I'm just going to read a quote to you, Russell, where he says, when Russell and I first started playing together, we were doing mainly straight up guitar rock. But when we started going to clubs, our whole approach changed. We were hearing atmosphere, space, rhythm in an entirely new way. So it sounds like it was quite a conscious decision to weave in the elements of kind of dance music and dance culture into your sound, or did it just kind of happen more spontaneously and naturally, would you say, or was it a conscious decision? You said we want to sound different, and that's why we want to weave in elements of dance and dance rhythm into our songs.
I think it was more organic rather than a like, oh, we've been doing this, we had a conversation, let's scrapple that, let's go in this direction. I think it was like a transition that occurred over months and years even, that I've still got some of our probably earliest like demos and messing around things that we did, and they were very much kind of predominantly in that kind of math rock world. And yeah, then I think you can kind of hear as those kind of club influences start seeping into the music. I think it was just more of a organic reaction to where our lives were at that point, rather than yeah, this like let's change course. I think yeah, it's funny because in later years when we've made albums that we have not always but sometimes you know sat down before we start writing and Kele in particular said like the last album was very much this. I think we should do something that's a bit more this. Um, like our third album, Intimacy, was probably our most electronic album at that time, and so then the fourth album for that was very much like a conscious decision about okay, let's go in a different direction and kind of strip things back and do something very guitar based and much heavier. Not with like kind of concrete rules of there will be no dance influences because it's in our DNA at this point. But yeah, it generally a conscious decision. Whereas yeah, at that point it felt natural, and there was also the lineup of the band wasn't fully established until
Mhm.
um, I'm trying to think. Yeah, kind of Gordon was probably joined like 2001, I think, one or two, and then Matt, I think it was 2003, and there were lots of other members kind of in and out at that point. So the pool of influences was always changing as well, and I think Gordon and Matt of the people we worked with prior to that probably had the most eclectic influences. Um, so there was a combination of factors like you know what we were listening to, where we were going out as teenagers, and the people we were interacting with, kind of all combined and gradually turned kind of sent us in this direction. I would say that was how it kind of panned out.
It's really, really interesting. I just want to stay with that, talk about those early days and the kind of influence of dance music to the band. I think when it comes to the origin story of Bloc Party, so much is made of, this idea of Kele passing a demo to the lead singer of Franz Ferdinand, and the interest in the band kind of snowballing from there. But I'm intrigued about this idea of I heard that you guys emailed Steve Aoki, the DJ, the American DJ with the She's Hearing Voices demo, and then he picked you up on his label. Is that correct? And where did that decision to email him come from?
Um, I'm not sure. I mean, that was like a little later. That would have been 2004, I suppose. Like, we had management at that point. Um, I don't know if we were signed or not. Or at least in the UK, we might have been. I think that came from our manager at the time. I think he already knew, even knew Steve Aoki or knew of him, had some kind of link, and I think our manager was the one that got in touch with him rather than us. Because he Steve Aoki wasn't a DJ at that point. He was like an indie kid like us running a record label and his own like kind of small independent record label and it was very much like guitar based music at that point. He was in a completely different world to what he is now. That kind of came a bit later for him. But the DIMAC records were kind of a very cool independent label in LA. So I mean, I know I didn't contact him. I would yeah, I'm pretty sure it was our manager that would have reached out to him at that point. I don't think they probably would have been on our radar that much at that point. Like our world was London, really. The internet did exist then, but it was nothing like how it is now. Access was still fairly limited, and so um, yeah, I imagine our knowledge of kind of the cool independent labels. I don't know, maybe Matt or Gordon might have had some knowledge, but yeah, I think that's probably the how that story was to me.
That clears up a bit of a when I was looking at like interviews with you guys and I see Steve Aoki's name pop out, it just seems like an interesting outlier, considering the other kind of contemporary bands that you guys were mixing with at the time. So it's interesting to kind of hear that it was maybe your management who were more swayed to kind of contact him and his label.
Yeah,
So
I mean, because
before we move into
our manager at the time was sorry, our manager at the time was he was around our age, I think a little bit older, but he was very much kind of clued into to the music scene, and he was in a band himself and stuff, so I think he was pretty kind of aware of the scenes like beyond London.
interesting. Before we get into Silent Alarm and talking about that brilliant debut record, you before you do that, you release a series of EPs. I think the self-titled EP and then the Little Thoughts EP as well. And those two, short, sharp CDs, Russell, have probably some of the biggest fan favorites that Bloc Party have ever release songs like Staying Fat and Little Thoughts and Tulips and Skeleton. I was in the audience at the Roundhouse a few years ago in London, and when you guys played Skeleton for the encore, you know there were so many great responses to your songs during that entire set, but Skeleton in particular had this kind of massive rapturous response. I know that the band has obviously started to upload a lot of the kind of B-sides to streaming services recently, including the kind of the Weekend in the City B-side album as well. Have you been surprised by the sheer level of love for these songs, which are essentially just they're deep cuts? Is that something that you've been kind of surprised by the level of pure love for these early songs?
Um, I mean, I think it's something I've been aware of for like most of our career because yeah, the fans and the people I speak to or that contact me have always been kind of quite vocal for their love for some of those songs. Yeah, Skeleton in particular seems to have a life of its own. It's been something that people have kind of shouted for at gigs and requested for yeah, kind of 20 years basically. So I think we've all been quite aware of well, that song in particular, but yeah, lots of the songs from kind of that period. Yeah, yeah, it's not a surprise in that people often uh, contact us and speak to us about them. So um, I was aware in that sense, and I think I'm a music fan myself, obviously, and I remember the kind of the key bands that I was particularly passionate about when I was younger, and I would feel the same about them, kind of consuming every single thing they released, and so I've always been aware that we're fortunate that we are an artist that a number of people feel particularly passionate about, um, and that's kind of what, at least what I always wanted to achieve when we first started doing this. Um, like I've always felt like there's kind of different kind of tiers of how people absorb music, and some of it's uh, kind of quite, how do I describe? I guess like some music people, oh, I like this, I like these bands, like yeah, they're fine, and they only have kind of a certain level of impact. But then there's a few artists that that seem to sometimes inexplicably just create this level of passion in people where they are really important in their lives. Like the music they've created is a step above that, and they kind of soundtrack this period of your life, and you really kind of associate them with that. Um, for me, like a band like Suede kind of ticks that box of
Mm-hmm.
it. What they were doing felt like, this is more than just kind of consumable music. Like this means something beyond that to me, and I kind of treasure everything that they do,
Mm-hmm.
and as a musician, like I want to replicate that, to create something that is really important to people, and they kind of treasure, and it lives on beyond that. And yeah, I kind of like think or hope that we have achieved that to a degree, and yeah, like you say, the fact that there is a proportion of people that feel that strongly about all the music we've released is, yeah, it's a great thing. It's something I'm very proud of.
I think you're absolutely right. I think I'm hopefully speaking for a lot of fans who will view this interview, but Bloc Party are one of those bands that have such great output throughout your entire career that it creates a fervor within fans to want to seek out everything you've done, and everything. Everyone seems to have their own favorite song that you guys have, and me in particular, when I hear Always New Depths, which I think I just have that YouTube video on repeat, and that's not even a kind of on a studio album, is I think I'm responsible for probably 2,000, 3,000 of those plays on the YouTube video alone. And yeah, it is amazing how many songs you have like that, and especially kind of coming out the gates from those early EPs through to the first album. And it's that first album, Russell, that we're obviously here to kind of talk. You've entertained my kind of half-hour spiel about the early days off the band, but obviously we're at 20 years of Silent Alarm, that brilliant debut from you guys. So you recorded this album with Paul Epworth in Copenhagen, and obviously he's gone on to be this super producer who's produced for the likes of Adele and U2 and Rihanna. But for you guys, when you were recording Silent Alarm, he was just starting out really. I think. What do you think it was that Paul Epworth brought to the sound of that record? Was it always an easy relationship working with him, or did you have to kind of have a few sessions to kind of scope each other out and make sure you were comfortable before agreeing to record Silent Alarm with him?
I mean, I guess the answer will probably be different for all of us, but for me, yeah, we had a good relationship from the offset. I guess it's difficult because he was also our first experience of working with a producer, so there isn't like a comparison point prior to that. Like we didn't have any kind of expectations of how things are supposed to be when you work with someone, when you kind of record in a studio. Everything we'd done prior to that was very lo-fi. So you know, he seemed like someone professional to us, whereas like, you know, we felt like, or I felt like, you know, we didn't really know what we were doing, and so was happy to be kind of guided and molded by him. And yeah, you know, he was like enthusiastic, and he was passionate, and you know that's exciting when you're going into a studio for the first time, and you've kind of got this kind of conductor figure who's kind of like kind of suggesting things, and you know you're trying lots of things for the first time, so it's all very exciting in that sense. I you know I think I mean it was just it was you know it was like novel hearing our, our music sound like proper music, because everything to that point was um yeah, it was very lo-fi, and you know, and it had its charm. Like we recorded the very first single ourselves, the first few tracks, literally on kind of Matt's like 8-track equipment, and so you know Matt essentially produced it, but you know, and it had like a unique sound to it, which I think you know resonated with people, and was very beneficial. But it also it didn't sound like the music that you listen to at home, like when you buy a CD. And then um, I'm pretty sure the first thing we did with Paul was Banquet, and um, or we did a few songs with him, but the first release was Banquet, and yeah, I mean, I remember listening to it in the studio, and I was like, wow, is this us? Like this sounds like proper music. You know, we're actually making real music. It kind of was taking things to a completely another level, and um, so yeah, like you know, he was a musician as well. He was still in a band at that point as well. Like you know, he being a producer wasn't his kind of like full time thing. I think he was not even sure what he wanted to do. Whether you know, I think he still wanted to be an artist as well. And you know, I remember we went to his gig while he was working with us. Um, so yeah, I think it was a mutually beneficial relationship in the end. I think because we managed to create something quite special. I think it probably you know gave him that like kind of confidence and knowledge of like, oh, you know, like I can do this. I'm actually very good at this. Um yeah, I'm sorry, I'm kind of losing my thread now, so I'll go over to you.
All right. I was going to ask you. I mean, I was reading a few things about how you made particular sounds on the record, and I read this piece that apparently on the Price of Gas, some of the kind of percussive noises at the start of that song are Gordon putting on like planks of wood onto his feet and stamping on the floor. Did Epworth kind of encourage you guys to experiment in that way, or was that something that you were kind of keen to do, the four of you, from the outset?
No, he very much encouraged that. Yeah, that in particular was definitely a Paul suggestion. Yeah, no, he was always kind of like just getting us to try random things. Yeah, which was like great for me, because I think you know initially we probably all kind of went into the process of recording of like, okay, this is the song, like these are our parts, like let's record them. Whereas he was kind of telling us, you know, like okay, yeah, we've got that bit. Let's try this. Like, can he like whip out like a random guitar pedal or um, I can remember he had some tiny little keyboard about this big, just with a few notes on it, and he was like, "Oh, yeah, like plug this in and put it in your delay pedal and try like see what happens with that," and that became like there's a little kind of motif in the chorus of Banquet, and that kind of came from there. So yeah, or I remember him on Little Thoughts. He could he had a good eye for seeing like what I could do as a guitar player, and kind of encouraging me to um I guess like to bring the best out of me. Basically, like he would say, okay, let's just do a take, like just try stuff, just mess around. And so that at that point in time, that felt quite an alien concept to me. But yeah, then kind of great things would come from that. And yeah, it's not a technique exclusive to him, but for us it was new. So yeah, that um, kind of opened up, I guess, what the world of recording could be. And I guess because I'm trying to think. I think we did 3 initial sessions with him. Like we, I can't exactly remember the order, but we did a session in London where I think we recorded Banquet and Staying Fat, probably, and we didn't even know which one was going to be the single at that point. I think us in the band were all quite keen for Staying Fat to be the single,
Right.
so that might have had a different outcome on our career. But yeah, then Banquet kind of quite transformed from what it sounded like when we'd first written it to how it ultimately turned out. Then I think we did a second session with him in London where we recorded kind of Little Thoughts and Tulip. I think we did Compliments then as well. Maybe one more song. I'm not sure. Yeah, so we did a second session in London, a few songs. And then we ultimately did the album for him a few months later in Denmark. And yeah, I think by that point, by the time we kind of got to the album, um, certainly for me, my kind of my eyes had been opened, and I was very much keen then to kind of experiment all the time and to always be trying things and always kind of like looking around the studio and finding bits of equipment to try and synths. I didn't play synth at that point, but there were lots of synthesizers lying around, and I'd be like trying things on that, and yeah, so yeah, he certainly kind of initiated that passion for experimenting.
Got you. It's really interesting to hear you talk about kind of songs that were in your, that you'd hadn't kind of had kicking around for a little while, such as, maybe she's hearing voices and Banquet and others that, took kind of a long time to kind of come to their finished version. So I know that like Eating Glass, which obviously kicks off the record, I think I'd read that for about a year or so that was kicking around and you guys didn't know how to get it to a version that you were all happy with. Can you just talk a little bit about that song in particular and the kind of early iterations of that and how you eventually came to settle on the version that we hear on the album?
Honestly, I'm going to be a terrible interviewee, but I can't remember that well how that one came together. Like I can only really remember it being in its finished form. Like I know we were playing it all the time at the kind of early gigs when we were starting out, and um, yeah, so I don't particularly remember it going through lots of different variations, even compliments, which I mentioned earlier. That was a very different song um, previously. Like I can remember that quite well. I've still got demo versions of it somewhere. Um, so yeah, like that one and Banquet and others, I can kind of remember quite vividly. But yeah, I can only remember like Eating Glass kind of like existing in its, generally in the state that it ultimately came to be. I think, there's kind of that initial kind of guitar sound that I was doing, and the kind of like Matt's drums, but like this kind of full on intense ferocity. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, one of the others might remember something differently to me, but I can't remember it being a different song.
Sure, that's fair enough. Russell, it is 20 years after all.
Yeah,
I
it's
guess
it's
it's
more than
it's
20
hard
years
to
because
remember.
um, like some of those songs are from like 2003, maybe earlier.
Yeah,
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 they're 20,
it's a long
22,
time.
23 years old now.
I do want to ask. I mean, one of the obviously the iconic Bloc Party trademark singles is Helicopter, which starts with that riff, which I think everyone of a certain age and into indie guitar music, I think everyone knows that song within about 1 second of hearing that riff. So you as a guitarist must be really proud of that riff. I think it sits alongside the likes of Johnny Greenwood and Johnny Marr in terms of how that's held up in the indie canon. Do you remember how you first came up with that riff? Was that something that had been kicking around for a while, or did you just come up with it in practice one day?
Yeah, I mean that one came together quite quickly, and it was one of the later songs of Silent Alarm in terms of when it appeared. So we were, from my memory, we were like um, we were kind of a functional band by that time. I don't know if we had a record deal or something, but we were doing like gigs, and I think we were doing gigs like kind of beyond London as well. Um, so yeah, it was probably, yeah. I mean, at least 2003. It might have been what, like kind of quite far into 2004, and Kele just kind of, because it's a dual guitar riff. It's not just my riff. And Kele just came to me like before we went on, like before sound check or something, and said, "Oh, I've got this riff. Can you write a counter riff to it?" And he just started playing his part. Um, and yeah, that's always come very naturally to me, doing things like that. And yeah, within a few minutes, I was kind of doing my part, and we were just sitting there with our kind of unplugged electric guitars, as we often were at the time. Yeah, and yeah, it was kind of done in a few minutes. It was quite easy, like, not to kind of sound like arrogant or anything, but like sometimes I don't know, like the best things do come together quite easily and quite quickly for us. I've found like you, you can just immediately, or I can just immediately hear like, okay, yeah, this is where this needs to go in my head before I've even touched the guitar, and then it's
Mm-hmm.
just a few minutes of transposing what's in my head to the guitar. Yeah, and then it's there, and and then we took it to Matt and Gordon, and the rest of it kind of fleshed out quite quickly after that. Um, yeah, I mean, I do remember. I think we've probably told this story before, but yeah, when we went to record it, the final version for the album, we were working with Paul, and he was quite adamant about changing the structure of the song. Um,
Really?
the kind of the pre-chorus section in particular, where there's like a little break and the time
Mm.
signature changes. Um, he didn't like that bit, and he wanted to change that. Um, and we were generally, especially because we had like a level of respect for him, like kind of happy to be led by him. But that one, everyone was quite like, nah, like we really want to keep it this way, and we kind of fought about it, but ultimately stood our ground on that one. But yeah, I remember that was kind of one of the rare moments, I think, where we were like, no, like we're doing this our way, like so. That's the end of the
Yeah,
story. But
I can't. Yeah,
so
I
yeah, no,
can't
but
imagine that
that's
song without it.
yeah, I think it's quite a kind of key moment of the song, and
Just to
and that math rock aspect was still quite ingrained in this. I think I don't think we wanted to. It felt like that was part of our roots. And even though we were going in this kind of like dancier, kind of almost um, I don't, yeah, like kind of dancier direction. We still wanted to kind of retain this nod to where we had come from as well, and yeah, like I don't know, to make it like interesting, so it wasn't just like, okay, this is like a pure guitar pop straightforward song. Like there are little kind of quirky moments, I guess, for want of a better phrase.
Yeah, I mean that stop start element of Helicopter, and indeed a lot of the record, that stop start rhythmic nature, I feel is such like an integral part of the record. I just can't imagine hearing that song without it. Just a very simple question on that song, Russell. I don't know if you've ever talked about this publicly before, and I don't know who's responsible in the band for titling the songs. Where does the title Helicopter come from?
So yeah, I don't know. Like we've it's not something we've discussed as a band, either then or at the time. Yeah, quite often, Kelly will give songs titles that don't seem to have any obvious correlation with the lyrical content. Um, so I don't, yeah, I don't know. I'd only be guessing. Like it might be some kind of imagery in his head, or some kind of sonic connection. I mean, I've always liked that, like both for us and for other artists, where yeah, like a song, the title isn't, oh, it's the refrain of the chorus, or something obvious like that. I kind of I yeah, I think it's quite powerful having like a non-associated noun
Hmm.
as a song title, because it instantly creates some kind of feeling, like before you've even heard it, and then when you do hear it, and it might not necessarily directly correlate, it still kind of um I don't know. It still kind of produces something, like aside
Yeah.
from the lyrics. So yeah, I've always been a fan of when kind of song titles do that.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. I wondered if there was a deeper meaning, but I do agree. Like when you hear that opening, dueling guitar riff off Helicopter, it conjures up a very it's such a ferocious sound that you can kind of hear the fury of a helicopter's rotor blades, or something similar. So it is a very kind of powerful title. I think just talking about the guitar across the rest of the record, Russell. I mean, so many people talk about the rhythm section of what Matt and Gordon are doing with drums and bass, and obviously Kelly's vocal delivery is very unique, and that again conjures up this sense of kind of fierce energy to the band. But I think a huge part of why a lot of fans love this record, and certainly as a kind of hobbyist guitarist myself, is your playing on this record, Russell, which seems so distinctive, and set apart from what other bands were doing at this time. My favorite part of the record is the kind of solo in the blue light, which I think is just a perfect complement to, the kind of sentiments that of the song and the kind of lyrics that Kele is singing about in that track. Do you have a favorite guitar part off the record that you're particularly proud of, or that you feel is overlooked?
Well, it's something that changes over time, I think, and it's it's probably particularly influenced by the fact of performing the songs live, like so many times, because um, getting that response from an audience really kind of influences like my relationship with a song. Um, so like a song like She's Hearing Voices with the kind of frenetic guitar solo at the end, that's it's fun to play, so it always kind of stands out to me as a highlight, because I personally enjoy playing it, and I can kind of there's a bit of wiggle room to improvise with it each time I perform it, and it's kind of crescendo of the song, so it always has a big energy and response in a live setting. So, but yeah, equally, I guess it probably doesn't qualify for um, underappreciated, because people do tend to enjoy it. Um, I think probably, I mean, my favorite song, certainly at the time, and goes back and forth, but yeah, my favorite song's probably generally been Pioneers. That for me is it's kind of like the most emotional song, musically at least, like instrumentally, and and in general. But yeah, I suppose it's not one that I tend to hear people comment about, at least in terms of the guitars. Whereas, yeah, I kind of like to think that what I'm doing is particularly dramatic, like almost orchestral, kind of like the just the kind of relentless intensity of the guitars. So yeah, that's probably one that stands out to me in that sense.
It's interesting, like hearing you talk about the Pioneers and the end of his She's Hearing Voices, which, like you say, have a kind of intensity and ferocity to the guitars. Whereas I've obviously kind of talked about Blue Light, and I'm reminded of one of my other favourite parts of your songs when I think about the end of Sunday, on the Weekend in the City, where you've got that kind of guitar break as well. Do you find it easier to write kind of guitar parts for faster songs, or is it across the board? You kind of will sit with a song for a while and then approach them evenly, or is there a do faster songs come easier to you, or is it more balanced?
So yeah, I'd say it's fairly balanced. I don't think the tempo particularly kind of dictates how easy or difficult it is for me to write something, because yeah, I mean, even if we just stick to Silent Alarm, like a song like Compliments, is very slow compared to most of the other songs on the album. But I think just as powerful in its own way. I think it's probably like more the feel of the song rather than the tempo, like whether it's slow or fast. It's more like what is the feeling that you're trying to convey, and what am I adding to that is um yeah, it's very much a song by song basis. I think like a, a lot of times I can just hear things really like, quickly, and it comes quite easily. Um, and then other times, yeah, you do have to sit with something for however long it takes, and for it to come to you. But um, I guess it's also, it's quite different now because I'm answering that like 20 years later, and how I approach songwriting compared to how I would have approached it at the time. Um, I think, especially at the time, it probably was more natural for us to be drawn towards faster songs just because we were, young and full of energy. But yeah, no, it definitely it wasn't something that dictated it. Like, yeah, it wasn't like, oh, a bit kind of begrudging. Oh, we've got to do like the slow song now. It was always just, each song had its own life.
I just want to just sort of on that thing you've talked about evoking a certain kind of feeling and generating a certain kind of feeling. And it kind of touched on what you were saying before about the use of the word helicopter. When it came to, you know, titling the album Silent Alarm, I know that you've spoken a bit about how I think you had a magazine, and on that front cover there was an article about a Japanese early detection earthquake system, and it said about silent alarm, and that's where you got the phrase. What was it about that phrase that stuck out for the four of you that you thought made it a perfect encapsulation off the record? Would you say?
Um, I think, I mean, at its very most basic, there are just words that seem to sit nicely together. Um, and I think, again, it probably goes back to the thing that you said about helicopter, where when you have like a noun, and in this case, like a noun and an adjective, but they're quite ambiguous, I suppose. Like that was probably something. I mean, yeah, even the name Bloc Party, kind of Bloc Party, Silent Alarm, they seem to naturally sit quite well together. They're both these kind of two-word phrases that don't mean one thing. You can interpret either of them however you want. That appealed when we picked the name Bloc Party in the first place. So I think when we stumbled across the silent alarm phrase, it was that same appeal of, yeah, like people are going to interpret this how they want, like rather than it being this kind of forced description. Yeah, I mean, at least for me, I think it was simple as that. I guess the fact we all agreed on it was probably quite a good selling point as well, because getting four people to agree on things, four people with quite different tastes and personalities was, challenging as well. So when someone agreed, when all four of us agreed on something, it was like, okay, this is probably good.
Let's get it done.
Yeah, yeah.
That's funny. So when the album comes out, Russell, 20 years ago, I think you guys spent pretty much the rest of the year touring, and obviously the album gets critically lauded. It ends up in, loads of critics' best of year lists. I think it was nominated for the Mercury Prize as well, and has all these kind of praise poured onto it. Were you, as a band, ready for that response? How did it feel going through that at the time? I know that Matt's talked a lot about kind of the difference about how people pay attention to mental health in the music industry now more than they used to 20 years ago. What was it like going through that at the time? Was it difficult, or did you love the whole process?
Well, again, everyone would probably have quite different answers. Like you referenced Matt there, but for me, like I would say it was overwhelmingly positive. I don't have any kind of negative memories of that period because it was all very exciting. Like every day, something new seemed to be happening. Like we were, um, we were touring lots. We were going to new places, which was very exciting. Like our audiences were growing. We like the the physical media um, was still very dominant then, magazines and so on. So every week we were getting featured here and a slightly larger feature in a magazine and so on, kind of, and then um, it just felt like yeah, it was like this snowballing of opportunities, playing Jules Holland and things like that. So it was it was just an incredibly exciting period. It felt like what we were doing was resonating with people and it was growing. Like more and more people were taking an interest and enjoying it. So yeah, that was very exciting. I think it was, at least for me, quite a bit later where um, any of the kind of like the downsides of the industry started to seep in. Um, I guess yeah, everyone will have their own feelings and experiences of how that was, and I certainly appreciate being the front person of a group and being one of the other members of the group, and especially not outspoken members of the group, is a very different experience, and yeah, you kind of um, I guess benefit from it not being particularly detrimental to your existing life if you don't want it to be. Whereas when you're, the primary focus, that's quite different. But yeah, for me personally, like yeah, that 2004 2005 period was very exciting, and and even like creatively as well. We were coming up with so many ideas at that point. So beyond the kind of like jumping on the wheel of the industry and getting absorbed in that world, we were still regularly writing new music, and so yeah, that was positive as well because it felt like we were like writing lots of good new music.
And when we think about the legacy of the record, obviously you guys toured with Paramore recently, who cited Bloc Party as their number one inspiration for writing their latest album. Kelly Clarkson covered "Like Eating Glass" on her TV show. So many people, contemporary artists, cite Bloc Party, and especially those early records, as such a big impact on their sound. Did you ever envisage that the record would have such a long tail to it? Um, is that something that still surprises you?
Yeah, no, I mean it's certainly not something I envisioned. I don't think it's something I would have even contemplated at the time. I think kind of my expectations of what we could achieve were um, quite like small at the time. Not in the sense of like, we're not good enough. Like we can only do this. Just I don't know. I guess like a kind of naivety of what being a musician actually was, because I think I just wanted to to do it because it felt like what I was kind of like born to do, and what my passion was to play guitar and make this music, and what the reality of that would be, of kind of like going on tour and traveling around the world, and so many people kind of like buying or consuming your music. It didn't really process at the time, and yeah, then once it did start happening, we I don't know. I still don't think I particularly looked like long term, of like, oh, I wonder if people will still be listening to this album in 10 years. You know, when you're young, like your kind of time frames are very different to what they are as you get older, and so the future seems very distant, and you don't always think about it. Um, yeah, like I remember discovering the Smiths when I was a teenager, and they were a band kind of from the 80s, and that seemed like so long ago when I was a teenager, but it was actually 10 or 12 years earlier. And then, and now we're talking about our album that's 20 years old. So then if I kind of put myself back in that position of like a teenager listening to music from 20 years prior, like it kind of wouldn't have necessarily registered with me, just like the the scales. So at the time, it wasn't something I actively thought about, and I think also, certainly for me, I think for Kelly as well, we've always been very forward looking. Like once something is done, once it's recorded, it's kind of like, okay, like that's that finished, and put it in this box, and put it over here, and like, it's all about the next thing. It's all about, what am I going to do next? What are we going to do next? Um, and obviously I appreciate we are like touring the album and celebrating it, but I suppose, yeah, more kind of on the creative front, we've always been focusing on what we're going to do next, rather than contemplating, how is this going to be perceived. But with that said, um, obviously I am subsequently aware and appreciate like how that album has stood the test of time, and people still kind of like adore it, to the point that they 20 years later they want to come and see us play it. So yeah, that's quite a special achievement in itself, I think.
Absolutely. And 20 years on, people like me still want to ask you really nuanced, granular questions about the record, Russell. And that kind of is a nice segue onto, you talk about you and Kelly are quite future focused. I just want to ask a few questions about kind of going forward and what's coming up for the band, in the future. Obviously, people talk about Silent Alarm and A Weekend in the City, those two twin albums at the start of your career, as particularly beloved. And you obviously alluded to this tour you're doing and have been doing about Silent Alarm 20 years on. Do you imagine you could do a similar thing for A Weekend in the City? I know you've spoken previously about how attached you are to that record, that you're particularly fond of that record. Is that something you imagine doing, or are you purely focused um, on the future now and kind of making new music?
I mean, I would certainly like to do it. Yeah, as you say, like that. That's it's probably still my favorite record that we've made. Or yeah, it's definitely a special one to me, and I enjoy performing those songs, and there's a lot we haven't played for a long time. I think there's one we've never played. So yeah, it would be it would be nice to celebrate that when the time comes. Um, I don't know whether it will happen. Like a lot of the time, these things aren't up to me. So, but I personally, yeah, if the opportunity arises to do it, then I would like to do it. It'd be fun to play those songs again.
Absolutely. I mean, that album in full, I'm sure there's a lot of interest in that, Russell. But like you say, it's not purely up to you. But if it happens, I'm sure that'll be rapturously received. And just two kind of final questions to kind of round things off. Silent Alarm is such a great. It's like capturing lightning in a bottle to me. Each of you brings such a distinctive part of your own sounds and the way you play your instruments to that record. And obviously the lineup of the band has changed since then. But I know that you've kind of worked with Matt on your solo record that you put out a few years ago. Do you see yourself working with Matt or Gordon for that matter anytime in the near future, or like you say, you just kind of focused on the kind of current lineup and making music as Bloc Party?
Um, I mean, I don't have any plans to. I don't have any objections to either. So give me a call, Matt. No. Um, sorry. So yeah, I guess my life is very different now to how it was back then, and everyone's lives are different, and uh, our relationships are different, and we live in different places. So I don't know. Realistically, I would be surprised, but then I had no plans to do the solo track that you mentioned with Matt, and that came together, and it was fun. It was fun to do something with him. So yeah, if the kind of opportunity organically arises, I'm uh, I'm happy to do so. But I think yeah, I'm kind of at the point where balancing what we do with Bloc Party and my family commitments are quite. Um, I don't know. I don't want to say time consuming. I guess Bloc Party is quite sporadic these days. But this year is quite busy. So yeah, in the near future, I would be surprised, but who knows? Who knows what the future holds?
Cool. And that is a nice kind of note to end on when you talk about a busy year for the band. I know you guys are in North America, I think, later this year. What plans do Block Party have in mind for 2025?
Yeah, I mean, predominantly tour doing the Silent Alarm anniversary shows. I think we're kind of doing bits from May till August generally. So yeah, that's going to be a kind of busy 4 or 5 months. We've been doing writing, so I imagine we'll record at some point this year. But yeah, I'm still kind of waiting to hear what the plans are with that. So yeah, whether that happens soon or after the touring is to be determined. But yeah, I think the plan is to record and put some new music out, whether it's this year or next year. I'm not sure about that yet either, but yeah, there are plans to have some new stuff coming.
That's great to hear, Russell. Any new music from Block Party is always something to look forward to. But I really appreciate you taking the time to kind of look back today as well, especially 20 years ago, which is such a long time ago. But been able to talk to you about your first record and kind of bring back some of those memories has been such a pleasure. So thanks for giving up your time, Russell, and best of luck with all the plans for the band this year. And also thanks for kind of troopering on when you've had no sleep. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no worries. I'm going to go and collapse now. So.
You deserve it, mate. Thanks, Russell.
No worries. You're welcome.